Appalachia. Everybody in the world has a reaction to that word. It makes folks think everything from beautiful mountaintop views, dangerous hillbillies running through the woods with a rifle in one hand and a jug of shine in the other, to trailer parks, drugs, and blame near everything in between. The Appalachian Mountains are the oldest mountains in the world. They once towered 30,000 feet into the air. They stretch along the eastern U.S. from Canada through 14 states all the way to Louisiana. The folks that live in these mountains have seen and endured enough things to have happened to them to make a preacher cuss. Hello, I'm Larry Bentley, and I was born and raised in the Appalachian Mountains of Southwest Virginia. And I was raised by folks who lived there for generations, right there in the heart of them old mountains. Now, come with me and we'll take a look at some of the odd, awful, or legendary things that happen within my beloved mountains, and we'll be traveling around a bit, looking through the eyes of an Appalachian at some of the crazy that spreads itself around outside the area as well. Welcome to Season 6 of Appalachian Murder, Mystery, and Legend. Howdy, my good friends. I hope you're doing well today. Thank you so much for stopping by. Now, we've all heard and read stories about how Appalachian folks marry their kin folks up to and including their own brother and sister. I'm here to tell you that most of that's just plain old bunk. Yes, I said most of it. We did a story a while back on the blue fugates of Troublesome Creek. The folks were of the opinion that their blue skin was because of their high degree of inbreeding. It turned out to be a lack of oxygen carrying component in their blood. Well, I found one that may just be the very reason that we, as faithful hillbillies that we are, see all of them stories and suffer all of them jokes about mountain folk being inbred. If you think your family reunions were a little bit out in left field because maybe Uncle Bob drinks too much of his pappy's shine and goes on a yeehaw tear, then, well, you ain't seen nothing yet. This group of folks took the phrase keeping it in the family way too literally. They lived in the Sperryville and Old Rag Mountain areas of the mountains back in the late 19th and 20th centuries. Folks who were born, and spend a lot of time in them old mountains know that now and every time you go out there, you hear something that just puts a little bit of E in your nice little getaway. After this story, you might be thinking what I'm going to be thinking the next time that happens. So hold on to your hats and maybe keep a hand on your family tree, because we're heading to the deep, dark tangles of the Blue Ridge Mountains in Virginia, where we're talking about folks known as the Harlow clan. Now, before I drop this one like it's hot, let's talk about what's sticking straight up in front of us all like a hammer smack thumb. Inbreeding. In the mountains, if you live in a holler where the only way in is a deer trail and the only way out's a pine box, your dating pool's about the size of a 5-gallon coal bucket. But the Harlows didn't just dip their toes in that pool. They did a cannonball right into the deep end. The Harlow clan lived in a place so isolated that the 20th century didn't just pass them by. It didn't even know they was home. We're talking about cabins made out of hand-cut logs and floors made out of packed dirt, and a diet mostly of corn, mountain tea, and whatever wandered into range of a squirreling rifle. That was if they lived in a cabin and not a cave to start with. Mountain tea, if you ain't ever had it, it's just about any kind of edible leaf that could be boiled into a drink. Sassafras was, the main ingredient in the spring, and we who live in the mountains, we know that tastes pretty well, don't we? Now, because they're so cut off, the Harlows started marrying their second cousins, then the first cousin. Then eventually the family tree started looking less like an oak and more like a telephone pole. It was a genetic loop-de-loop that would make a biologist's head explode. The results just wasn't odd-looking people. It was a brand of physical and mental decay that the outside world found plumb terrifying and fascinating at the same time. They had what the local doctors called the Harlow look. Heavy brows, recessed chins, and eyes that stared off into two different time zones at the same time. Believe me when I tell you that's a good bit tough to deal with. I worked with somebody that had that problem. Well, I reckon I shouldn't say he had that problem. Heck, it didn't seem to bother him at all. It's literally the opposite of being cross-eyed. I'm being serious when I tell you that when I tried to train the guy, I didn't know which eye to look at while I was talking to him. He would turn his head and look at me through one eye, and by the time I locked onto that, thinking that was his good one, oh, he'd flip the script on me and go to the other one. But anyway, around the 1920s, Virginia figured it would do the latest hip thing. It went plumb to what we would call today Adolf Hitler and got itself a eugenics board. Actually, believe it or not, that type of thing was growing pretty popular back then. Now, I reckon everybody that supported it thought that they were on the desirable side of the gene pool and didn't seem to realize that once the government starts messing in something like that and sees it ain't working like they planned, which is most of the time, well, make that about all the time. It's only a matter of time until they'll be knocking on your doors. The eugenics board was a bunch of bureaucrats in nice white lab coats that thought they could perfect the human race by deciding who got to have kids and, by golly, who didn't. They looked at the Harlow clan and about dropped a bunch of sod in the drawers. They didn't see people. They saw a menace to purity and the Commonwealth, and they called them feeble-minded degenerates. Now, while the Harlows might have been missing a few decks off the top of the card as far as what folks living outside the area thought, the state's solution was pretty much to treat them like livestock. They started a program of forced sterilization. They'd tell a Harlow woman that she was going in for an appendectomy, which to the poor woman meant that she was getting some kind of a bargain on health care. Then, once she was out cold on the operating table, whoops, she couldn't have children again when she woke up. It was a literal clinical cruelty that makes the Harlow's mistakes look like a Sunday school picnic. Like I always said, it depends on where you're standing in this country. When the question is how smart you are comes up, that determines exactly how smart you really are. So despite the Harlow clan having feeble reputation, they were absolute masters of their domain in the mountain where they live. And that makes them pretty blame sharp in my book. They knew how to find ginseng, how to trap food, and most importantly, how to hide things. Now, one branch of the Harlow clan found a vein of high-grade copper and silver, and it was all hidden in a cave near old Rag Mountain. They'd bring out just enough to trade for whatever they needed whenever they needed it. Then when the tax man and the land speculator started sniffing and poking around, well, the Harlows just completely forgot about where it was and didn't know nothing about no silver or copper. Folks say that there's still a Harlow treasure hid up there somewhere, guarded by the ghosts of a dozen flay-eyed ancestors. But I wouldn't go looking for it. That terrain is tough enough to crack a mule's hoof, and the locals still don't take kindly to folks poking around their business up in that parts. Now, when the government decided to create the Shenandoah National Park in the 1930s, they had to clear out the mountain people. Now, the Harlow clan didn't leave. Now, they'd been on that, didn't want to leave. They'd been on that ground for about as long as before Virginia was even a state. But the government, used a catch-all that they always use and like so much, called eminent domain, which is a fancy way of saying that, we've just got more guns and lawyers than you do. They dragged the whole clan off and relocated them. Next thing they knew, every blame one of them was back. So they finally had to drag them off and burn the cabins to the ground to keep them from moving back in. Now imagine being a Harlow. Your family's lived in one spot for over 150 years. You're related to everybody within 20 miles, and suddenly a man in a park ranger hat tells you you're unsightly and you got to move to the flatlands. Now, most of the Harlows just didn't survive the transition. They were like deep-sea fish brought to the surface too fast. They just kind of imploded on themselves. They ended up in relief colonies or working in textile mills, while their mountain secrets got buried under the asphalt of progress with them. Now, the story of the Harlow clan ain't just about inbreeding and what people think about hillbillies. It's a story about what happens when isolation meets government that thinks it knows what's best for everybody, or whoever she's decides to mess with next. It's a tragedy wrapped in a whole mess of errors with a side helping of genetic monstrosity. But I'm not done. This is where the story starts being a series of full-blown campfire nightmare stories. The folks of Madison and Rappahannock counties don't still just talk about the Harlows as a bygone disadvantaged family. They talk about the old rag ghouls. Apparently, when the government went through and dragged off the Harlows and burned down their home places, a few of them got away. That made the gene pool even smaller. The old rag ain't exactly like old other mountains in the Blue Ridge. It's a heap of old granite full of rock scrambles, deep seams, and caves, and it stay cold enough to hang meat in August. It was a perfect fortress for a family that the government decided was unfit. As the inbreeding in the Harlow line kept right on going, their physical traits, well, let's just say that they started to be a little bit more distinctive. A few more generations down the line of the family loving, the Harlow clan started to look less like Virginia farmers and more like something to be sitting around in the bar scene from Star Wars. They were referred to as ghouls and were deathly pale because they spent so much time in the deep shade of the granite crevices or inside their caves that they had elongated limbs and a way of moving on all fours that made the tourists who started trickling into the area think they were seeing some kind of a mountain ape, wendigo, skinwalker, or rake or something. But it sure enough wasn't any of the above. It was just a Harlow that forgot how to stand up straight because the ceiling of his cave was only 3 or 4 feet high. Folks from all over the country would make a trip down to the new Shenandoah Park to commune with nature, wearing their fancy hiking boots and carrying their wicker picnic baskets, and they'd be halfway up a rock scramble, huffing and puffing, while a ghoul would be sitting 10 feet away in the crack of a rock, watching them like a hawk with eyes that could even see in pitch black dark. Now, the Harlow clan had developed a mountain language that didn't even involve words. It wasn't nothing but clicks, pops, and whistles. If a hiker dropped a ham sandwich or maybe a flask, it didn't hardly hit the ground before the pale hand would whip out from the shadows, and it was gone into the Harlow treasury before the hiker could even think to look down and find it. But it wasn't all snatching up stuff that folks dropped. There was a few hikers that went missing. Now, the official record says that they likely fell into a crevice or got lost there and succumbed to the elements, but the local folk look up at old Rag and talk about how the Harlows didn't just want their sandwich. They wanted their shoes, the jacket, and maybe a new set of DNA to throw into the family pot, and then maybe throw into the stewing pot after that. Now, the most famous of the ghouls was a feller that the locals called Old Pale Silas. Now, Pale Silas was, as far as anybody knew, a Harlow who was so physically jacked up by his genes that he couldn't walk on flat ground. His joints were locked in a way that he was just permanently hunched. Old Silas was what they called the king of the rocks. He knew every squeeze and chimney in the granite. Folks say that he had a collection of trophies from the outside world, which was gold watches and, that didn't tick, spectacles with no lenses, and a pile of leather boots that he didn't wear and couldn't wear, and he just liked the smell of them and chew on them. When the park rangers came in to investigate what was happening on the mountain then, they went sent a team up to find old Silas, and they found his nest, which was a cave lined with dried moss and stolen blankets, but old Silas was gone. They say he didn't go down to the flatlands like the others. He just went deeper. Some folks believe Pale Silas Harlow and some of his descendants are still up there, and they're still tough, and it's like they're made out of some kind of gristle or something, but raw bone maybe, or just pure stubbornness. Folks say that they're watching the tick-tock hikers fight their way up the rock scramble and waiting for them to drop something worth swiping. Now, the worst part of the whole thing is that the Harlow whistle. Now, even today, hikers report hearing high-pitched rhythmic whistling that don't sound like any bird they ever heard, and they say it's a sound that comes straight out of the rock cracks. It's a reminder that you can burn a man's cabin, you can sterilize his sisters, and you can drag him out of the mountains, but you can't quite get rid of the mountains in him. If you're ever walking on old rag, keep your ears peeled for the whistles and clicks, because I bet you'll hear them. Or the next time you'll be hiking in the Shenandoah and you see a pile of rocks and used to be a chimney maybe, just tip your hat, because you're likely standing on the remains of a family that was too close for comfort and too tough to be tamed. I hope you got something out of our podcast today. If you did, please rate and review, and if you're watching on YouTube, Spotify, or Rumble, throw us a like, and don't forget to subscribe or follow wherever you watch or listen. Come on over to Appalachian Murder, Mystery, and Legend Podcast group on Facebook, where we talk Appalachian or about anything else you want to talk about. I'll be back real soon with another Appalachian Murder, Mystery, or Legend, and I will see you then.